Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the PM Learning Series. My name is Shavi. I am a product lead at LinkedIn and host for this show. Please introduce yourself, drop in the chat where you're joining us from. As many of you know, the PM Learning Series is a series of live streaming events where industry thought leaders and product practitioners share their product career journeys, as well as lessons learned to inspire aspiring and current product builders like you to level up your product career. Make sure you subscribe to our newsletter, which you can find a link in the event details tab to receive key takeaways, recapping today's event, as well as future event updates. So today with me, I have a very, very special guest. Let me bring him up to stream. Hi, Raphael. Thanks for joining us. Really, really great to have you here.
Hey, Shavi.
All right. So, Raphael, you and I met maybe through another actually PM Learning Series guest, Jennifer, which was one of our favorite as well. We talked quite in depth about some of the, moments around being an introverted leader. So today's talk, I'm also really excited about career reinvention. I think many of us are top of mind for a lot of our members in the community based on past shows. So I'm really, really excited to have you here. So Raphael is a seasoned former Google exec, leading products that serve billions. You didn't hear it wrong, billions of users, and generated billions in revenue as well. You, as an esteemed product management expert, you co-founded Pig Product, which is an advisory and recruiting firm, as well as the PM Product Management Festival in Zurich and Singapore. Boosted a community of over 20,000 members, helping organizations establish strong product practices and amplifying individual PM impact. We'll dive into some of that and your learnings and reflections on some of this really, really interesting sort of post-Google PM career. And you are also the creator of the Product Management Executive Program at INSEAD and serve as a personal coach and advisor to CPOs, heads of products, and other senior leaders. One of the probably arguably the most important sort of fun fact for me is that you invested in over 200 startups, including 20 unicorns, 20 plus unicorns. This is also very, very special. Thank you so much, Raphael. You just have like a full, I think, highlights, reel of your resume and LinkedIn profile. Definitely would like to dive into some of your career reflection, pivotal moments, and hear kind of the personal side of your story. But before we do that, folks, please continue to introduce yourself. I see a lot of folks joining us from Morocco, from Ghana, Argentina, India, Montreal, Canada, Seattle, Georgia, London, Nigeria, Switzerland, Italy. Wow. As I promised, Raphael, I hope I just didn't disappoint. We have folks from all over the world in pretty much every continent. And knowing that it's 6 p.m., for many of folks on a Friday night. So this is really, really exciting and honor to be able to build this global community. Now, without further ado, let's get started. So as I mentioned, we heard sort of the resume, LinkedIn bio version of your experience. Tell us a little bit more about when would you consider as a pivotal moment in your career that led you to discover, hey, I want to become a PM. I am a PM.
Yeah, that's a great one. So first of all, welcome everyone. I'm also super touched by everybody showing up. It's always super cool to connect with many folks from the globe. So that's wonderful. And thanks for doing that service, Shavi, to the community. So yeah, let's get going. I'm looking forward to that 30 minutes. So yeah, I would say a pivotal moment for me was actually joining Google. And I mean, of course, for everybody, joining Google would be somewhat pivotal. But the point is, I was not a PM before. So, I studied computer science, but I also have an MBA. I started a company and then I worked at another company. This was all pre-Google. But, I was always lingering between business and tech, and I always felt I'm a techie. I love technology, but I also felt like I was clearly clearly not the best person in the room if it comes to technology, right? So there's something strange and a bit confusing for me about being a geek, but also being interested in people, in business, right? And then also in the application side of things, right? So I think only at Google, which was now about 15 years ago, I think I got closure on that. And I sort of felt, okay, now I get it. This is me, right? This is maybe the frame of reference I could use for myself. So I'm very grateful for that.
That's awesome. I'm sure a lot of folks in the community will resonate with the part where you didn't start it out being a PM, but you kind of zigzagging, exploring different careers before you become a PM. During our, sort of prep talk, chit-chatting right before the streaming, you mentioned a very interesting detail about you were part of the steering committee at Google, helping to form, how to hire PM, how to think about hiring. I'm sure that, especially with today's macro environment being massive layoffs from tech companies and a lot of people starting to learn more and more about PM, right? That's why they are joining this show probably, or, thinking about, hey, I want to become a PM, or thinking about what's the next evolution of my PM career. Can you tell us a little bit more about what are some, I guess, like a better way of describing it, best practices or mental models to think about if I'm a pivoter, I want to become a PM in today's environment, what's the best way to approach that?
Yeah. Well, that's a big one. I give a bit of context for folks maybe to place me and know, kind of from which perspective I'm answering the question. So I spent about 13 years at Google. I was first one of the leads on Google Maps. Actually, this is early days, right? This is just when Google Earth launched, and actually Google Earth was acquired by Google, and I worked with some of the early folks there. And then I worked for 7 years on Google Shopping, where I was leading the merchant side of a many billion-dollar business. But I was always curious, and this also maybe touches the portfolio topic for in a bit. I was always trying to do other things as well, right? And be a little bit curious beyond my day job about other elements, right? And this could be entrepreneurial things, then the product management festival, which I started about 10 years ago. But one of the things I've always liked as well is to understand the PM function at Google, right? And how Google thinks of PMs. And partially back to your pivotal moment question, because I felt so grateful. And again, not only about Google, but also Google giving me finally this home or this feeling, okay, this is sort of my place, right? Or this is my title. This is who I could be, right? And I made this career on the PM ladder, right? So I wanted to join this PM steering group, and maybe for folks that maybe cannot place what that would mean, the steering group is, you could say, it's a group of elders in Google. For example, Jonathan Rosenberg, which is a pretty luminary figure in the product management space. He was one of the earliest, I think, first PM hire at Google, and is still involved in Google. He was there, and a few other really older folks. And I was actually the only one from Europe. And I think one of my reasons why I was there is that I was not in the headquarters. Everybody else was in the headquarters, right? So I'm giving that context so that folks understand sort of what we were doing, right? So we were looking at, and when I joined Google, we were about 18,000 people, right? And when I left Google 2 years ago, I think we were about 200,000 people, right? So you could imagine that even within those 15 years, the perspective changed, right? But that group, that steering group, was looking at the PM function, right, and kind of whom to hire, what to expect, right? And just super briefly, if I maybe highlight a few changes and maybe a few, and that goes in line maybe with industry changes, right? I think in the beginning, we're very much looking for entrepreneur type of people, right? Like, because I was an entrepreneur myself, like Google was looking at people that were given a mission and then were quite self-starters, right? And taking a problem and run with it, but really in a very contained way, right? Like a small pizza team size of thing, right? That changed dramatically as Google grew, like as one thing that has changed, right? Now, from a PM at Google, and I think that goes really for every big tech company these days, right? You're looking at people that are, yes, self-starters, can drive their own mission and drive to an outcome. But they, for example, would also be very good at liaising with other teams, right? They would be strong communicators. They could work with execs. Maybe they have business sense. Maybe they have design sense. So one of the things I learned there is, the way how we started to look at PMs might not be the one how a mature company looks at it, right? It's much more broader responsibility. That's one thing. Another one is, for example, technology, right? When I started, it was still, computer science. We all had to have computer science degrees, or it was very exceptional that somebody wouldn't hire people without. Google dropped that 5 years ago. And it's another industry trend. I think, yes, you need to understand technology, but honestly, I think the PM job is so general and so multifaceted that there's limits to how even as computer science, there's a lot of things I didn't understand in my job. So yes, that's another thing that has changed over time, right? And yes, I mean, you mentioned it, kind of also for folks on, listening to this or watching this. The industry has matured. I think that's clearly one thing I'm seeing with Google, but also with the PM Festival or the work I'm now doing post-Google. It's good news. The PM function has matured. People know roughly what to expect from a PM. I think it's less chaotic. There's books, this series and others, help converge it. The one thing I would still say, and that's also something we could talk a bit later if you wanted to, is there's still something I would call the exec product gap. Meaning that within product, we might have converged a little bit on what best practices are and what it means to be a good PM. But execs, like non-PM types, right? People that run sales or marketing or run the company's C-level, they might still not know at all what PM does, right? And there's a gap. And that's actually, by the way, a lot of my time currently goes into closing it. But that's a huge, huge gap. And sometimes we look at it from a PM bubble and think, well, it's obvious this thing has matured. It has matured for us, but not necessarily for the rest of the world.
Absolutely. I remember every time I travel, even outside of Silicon Valley, and then at dinner table or just like conversations with strangers. Like most recently, I went to Italy, for example, in July. And then when I introduced myself, I said, I'm a product manager. And they will be like, oh, so what do you do? Like, do you build apps? But then that's engineers. So how are you designing apps?
Yeah,
or when you talk to your Uber driver or Lyft, right? Like that's like also a good test of like how much people, how much room there's still to grow to like educating people about this discipline.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of folks joining us. There's some fans from Switzerland as well, Raphael. And folks, please drop in the chat what questions you might have for Raphael, and we'll pick them out from time to time to share with the community. All right. So today's talk, again, it's kind of unusual. We never really done a sort of a career talk anchoring around reinvention, right? So both reinventing as a PM, but also thinking about potential life beyond being a product manager. During the intro, we talk about your work at Pick Product, the Product Management Festival, your career sort of transition from Google to building this portfolio career, which I think has become more and more sort of a popular topic among the younger generation or people who are thinking about like mid-career change, like exiting the workforce to do something on their own. Tell us a little bit more about how that come to be and what was the reflection that led to this moment and the type of work you do now.
Yeah, I think I'll first talk about maybe my own journey in this, and then I comment a little bit on how I see it big picture and pros and cons and maybe advice, right? So my very personal journey was that, like I said, my pivotal moment was, finally I arrived at a place that I loved and where I really enjoyed every day or almost every day of my job. And that went on for a very long time. Like in my specific case, again, 13 years, I got promoted, I think 4, 5, 6 times. Like I was a senior director in the end, which in Google is a very high level. And I loved it, but that at the very, very end of it, this is where I started, to think about, okay, what else? Or do I want to do this another 10 years? There's a price you pay, right? But I'm saying specifically, this is more in maybe the final third of my career, right? This is a late thought in a longer career arc, right? And in my specific case, that type of exec job means a lot of travel. It also meant, for example, because I was always not in the headquarters, which is super interesting. I think some of us joked sometimes that it's harder to be a PM not in the headquarters. Actually, you have to be a better PM, not in the headquarters, because you're really doing your day job and then you're also doing a night job. In our case, it was truly a night job because of the time difference. Like now, we're like 9 hours apart, because you have to do stakeholder management, right? And in my case, for the final 5 years, I was 100% my peers and my managers were all in the US, right? There's nothing else in Europe, like, because I was the most senior person in Europe. And that's super cool and amazing in a way, because you have a lot of autonomy for your European job, but then you pay a big price, right? Again, in terms of travel, staying up at night. And Google, like at that level, you're already in a way expected to live for this job, right? There's no mercy. Like, you're 100% for this job. There's even weekends, right? You're expected to jump on anything that needs attention. And I loved it. Just to be clear, this was something I loved for a long time. But there came a moment, like, and I should also say, I'm in my late 40s now. Like, at age 40 or 45 or so, there were moments where I thought, okay, what am I sacrificing, right? Like, for example, I don't have kids, but I have a wife, right? I have to have some quiet evenings, right, from time to time. You're always on, right, with that type of job. And again, I'm not complaining. Google compensated me well, and I also gave me, frankly, a lot of learning opportunity. I'm grateful for everything, but there's a point, maybe that's the meta point I'm making here, at every career moment, right, or when you start to feel, I don't know, something doesn't feel 100% right, then you can start thinking rationally, right, about what is the pros of this, the cons, right? And for me, for the longest time, the pros, I guess, were like strong, right, and outweighing the cons. But I think it's also important to be, at a minimum, be aware of the cons, right, at any point, like, know the price you're paying, because you're always paying a price. And just, see, okay, is that fine, right? Again, family might be one, or health might be another one. And then I at some point concluded, right, that I said, I quit, when I'm at the highest, maybe at the peak of my career at Google. Next step would have been VP, and then really, run even bigger things. But I thought, another 5 years or so, what's the marginal benefit of another 5 years in this versus really starting something new, right? And I said in the beginning, I was an entrepreneur. And I should also say, I started the product management festival about 10 years ago. Now it's actually 11. So really in the middle of my Google career. And I already back then felt, I want to, because I was so grateful about what I learned at Google, I want to start something where others could kind of come in and chip in and have a platform for learning, like very similar to what you're doing, Shivi. And then this grew right into over 1,000 people every year in Singapore, Zurich, as a way to, like we're doing right now, discuss career, discuss other things, good PM best practice. But my point is, I started diversifying already very carefully. I didn't distract me from my job, but I thought, you know what, I want to cook something on the side. And another one is angel investing. We couldn't discuss this later. And these were two things where I could contain, I guess, my investment, right? So I could say, yes, this is, I don't know, another 5 hours a week. But you know what? There's pros and cons to those 5 hours, but the pros matter a lot to me, right? I could compensate a little bit, right? So I started maybe carefully to look into a portfolio career there. And then finally, again, flipped the switch and said, you know what? Now I'm done with one big job. Now I want to do a couple of my own smaller jobs, but in some, like you said, they become a portfolio. Ideally, they're connected. So I like to believe there's synergies, and in a way, the one energy unit I put in here kind of comes back in others. That's not always the case. Sometimes you're also distracted and you don't, you're pushing and nothing happens. One thing I want to say, and then I'll stop for maybe questions. One thing I want to say to folks, I think it's very different to think about a portfolio career, mid-career versus early career. And the point I'm trying to convey here is, I think at the early stages of a career, it might be a bad advice to say, I'm starting a portfolio career for many folks. And my point is, I think there is a point in trying to, tune yourself into an organization, into expectations, into management, into a company, into a mission, into a product, and give it all, right? Give it your 150%, because I think you will learn things, and you will be rewarded with more responsibilities, growth, and learning. That is very, very good and very healthy, right? So I would say push as long you want, and you again, pros and cons, are matching for you. I think if you too early say, you know what, I don't like that, I don't like my manager, let me start, 3 things in parallel, there's also a big risk that you're distracting yourself, and we're actually not very, very good at each one of those. So I think I would say at the early stages of a career where you're actually developing your career, my advice would be go for excellence, focus, and try to get as far as you can, and really don't hedge your bets, right? My point was really when I felt, I exhausted almost this one thing, and I paid a price again. This to my pros and cons, right? I knew the price; it was a conscious thing, but now I want to add a few other things, maybe to compensate for some of the cons, or maybe just have a bit more fun or a bit more balance in life.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that perspective, Raphael. Let's unpack some of it. I think you partially answer some of the question, but let's just break it down. So we have one question from the community, from Yuri, about, let's say, looking at the beginning of your PM career, which you mentioned a little bit, give it 150%, but what are some crucial aspects that you can maybe share, not just from your perspective, but also like sort of elevator for the community that, hey, it's really amazing, by the way, that you were able to, I think, get promoted 5 or 6 times throughout your, decades at Google. Sometimes I heard the other story, people get stuck at certain levels and wouldn't be able to break through. So what were some of the things that you did that really helped you to, get to a stage where you can be like, okay, I might want to do something else. So like, do you max out this growth trajectory?
Yeah.
What advice do you have?
Oh, fantastic question. And very clearly, this is not portfolio, this is focus, right? And I think, again, if you're starting, this is what you should do, right? So a couple of thoughts. So one is really, really go all in, right? And I think I really said, this is the once in a lifetime opportunity for me. And I mean, going all in, I mean, it's like also have skin in the game, like really say, I'm owning this, right? And I'm not giving up, right? And with this, I mean, in a product career, this is often product outcomes, right? Or product success. It's not showing up. This is not writing pretty decks, right? I think in many cases, this is making a difference for the company, right? And I can, at every single of my promotions, I can tell you what my contributions were for the company, right? Not for me, not for my product, not for my team, for the company, right? So I think it's very important, and this is how companies measure you, right, in the early stages. Do you make a difference, right? Do you get shit done? Do you think about the next thing, the non-obvious, right? Do you surprise people? So I think there's a lot to be said in the early days about, again, focusing, seeing of the sea of opportunities. Which ones are the ones that are paying off, again, for the company, not talking about you. And then trying to deliver and deliver and deliver, right? Every company looks for talent that reliably delivers, right? I was a manager of managers, like in huge organizations. From my perspective, what I'm looking in a more junior PM is, will they deliver, right? Will they own the thing? Do I have to worry about them, or will they surprise me positively? And if you're doing this consistently, then every organization is dying to fuel that talent and give you more responsibility, because that's how organizations grow, right? By fueling talent. So I think understanding that, and it's easier, it's maybe somewhat easier said than done, because you might not know what the best opportunities are, right? So you have to try out, you have to get advice, you have to talk to customers. Like, this is not only a desk position, this is a position or a mission. If you really want to make a change, right, where you have to go the extra mile, right? And again, depends on the product, but talking to customers, flying to, if it's B2B, that you could talk to a lot of people. B2C, you could do a lot of research and stuff. Like, basically owning the mission, owning the outcome, and making a difference. I think that's my overarching advice at the early stages of career.
Yeah, I love that. I can clearly tell how much you are passionate about this and the ownership mentality that comes out. This is really, really great. Thank you so much, Raphael, for sharing that. Another question that I want to also double click is a sort of related type of mid-career reinvention, but not so much in the sense of creating a portfolio career, but more like, I actually get this kind of question a lot, which is, people might have a decade of experience not being a PM. And then now, because PM becomes such an sexy, popular, job, right? Like, everybody wanted to become one in some shape or form. But the chicken and egg question is, always, or the dilemma from a career perspective. Actually, I personally faced it a little bit, not with 18 years, but like a good decent number of years in non-PM function. And when I pivoted a few years ago, I had to make that trade-off. Like, I was ready to advance to people management. Am I ready to go back to IC, being a junior IC and starting over? And then a lot of the other trade-off that comes in that, right? And I see friends talking about it a lot. So I think this is another type of sort of a mid-career kind of reinvention to become a PM in this case. And what's your advice to people? How do they think about the trade-off that they might be making if they already had a decade plus of experience in a different field and looking to transition into PM? Is that like, should they be really gung-ho and straightforward, like committed and own it to drive that? Or there's some other ways to think about it?
Yeah. Fantastic question. And yes, I get this also a lot at the conference or when we do executive education. So first of all, I think it's mostly good news. That's my summary. And the reason why I'm saying this is I think, generally speaking, this function has matured. People more or less know what to expect from it, and you can make a career in this. This is not gonna go away. Let's say that, right? That's the good news, right? This was, by the way, different 10 years ago. Back to my conference, for example, or Marty Kagan's books or others, right? These were the pioneers of product management that try to standardize this and make this a thing beyond big tech, right? And I think this has mostly happened. So if you're interested, but you haven't done it, then I think, well, the obvious thing is try it out and try to get as much credibility in the space as you can. The one challenging thing about being a PM, and I think many PMs, I would assume, will agree with that, is yes, it's maybe a sexy thing to be a PM these days, but it's also like a very fuzzy role, meaning you might earn the title, you might be given the title, you might be given the responsibility, but then it's not like everybody knows suddenly what you're doing, and it's not like suddenly everybody empowers you, right? A big thing in PM is empowering, like being empowered by executives. This was to my previous point that many executives still don't understand PM. There's no such thing as ever being getting trust or being empowered without earning it. And how do you earn trust as a PM? Well, if you deliver. But if you've never done the job, or if you've never, shepherded a product or grew a product, then you might not know how to deliver. So the point I'm making is, or my concrete advice I'm giving is, it's good that you're interested. I think the other good news, this role is willing to accept different backgrounds. I think, to my previous point about tech, it's not about tech anymore. I've seen many different, I've seen sales and marketing and other roles, but there's still no substitute for real life experience in doing the job. So if you've never done it, my advice would be try it. Try it with a side project. Try it with maybe, I don't know, a nonprofit you do on the side, or maybe an app. But it's something that you have to do, and you can read as many books as you want, and you should read many books. Marty Kagan's books are amazing. But then you should also have real life experience, because it is a lonely job. It is a chaotic job. It is a crazy job. And sometimes you don't know what you're doing, and you don't know what works. But this instinct, right, to know what is a good product and a bad product, how can I improve a product, is something you can learn. But you can mostly learn it by doing it, practicing. And it's and again, the books are great, but 80%, I would say, is implementing and trying it out, right? So be ready to get your hands a little bit dirty and get some credibility and evidence, and then people will accept you and give you a chance in an official title.
Yeah, I love that advice. I think it sort of answer actually a lot of the other questions related to, like, should I build a portfolio? Maybe, if you want to get your hands dirty and learn. And then I think your earlier response to Yuri's question was also really inspiring. Just the ownership mentality, because this job is messy. Sometimes you just don't know what you're doing, but you need to keep showing up, keep delivering. And then a lot of times what I realize is that, hey, a lot of other functions like engineering, design, sales look up to you, right, as the leader of the product, to kind of project that level of optimism when things are a little murky, when we don't know, when the results are not lining up what you expected. I think having that sense of drive and ownership is really, really essential. And then there's questions about, is the session being recorded? So maybe there's some new people here. Yes, it is being recorded. You can access through the same link to watch a replay. And then also please subscribe to the newsletter, which you can find a link in the details tab. So we will send out recaps of today's events and future event update. Now with that, Raphael, I'd like to start to transition a little bit to another related topic. I know that Susan from our community is framing it more from a PM perspective. Let's say you're communicating with different stakeholders. We mentioned earlier, right? A lot of people still don't quite know what PM does. But as a coach, and leader, advisor yourself, what challenges do you face when trying to explain like the essence of product or good product to, let's say, executives or sales teams or people who are outside of product function? Like, how are you value add, or what are some of the key challenges, and how do you communicate with them to build empathy?
Yeah, no, I think that goes to the heart of it, of the problem. And I think it's a beautiful thing that product is so messy, but it's also a very daunting thing, right? And I think it's messy on at least two levels, right? I mean, the job itself, the PM job is messy in a way that it's not like project management, right? Project management, as many of you know, it's predictable in a way. It's not easy, but it's predictable, right? If you know how to structure a project, and then you go from A to B, right? And if you, I don't know, miss a deadline, you cut things, right? I mean, in essence, you can manage it, right? I think product management, even though it's called management, has an element of creativity, of feedback loops, of trying out things where it's unpredictable and you don't know the outcome, right? So it can be frustrating and messy, even on its own level, right? And yes, to this question now, the added complexity is that people that don't have that experience or that job might be even more confused than you about what you're doing, right? And I'm working on this interface now, right? And even in my latest years at Google, I would say the majority of my conversations with folks were not about product details anymore. They were classical, let's say, business communication, right? With a sales leader, right? What's the expectation? What are the issues, right? With marketing, how do we position this, right? Pricing. Or with executives that wanted to check in, right? And see what is working, what is not working, how can I help, right? So my advice for that type of communication is realize that, again, this PM role, as beautiful as it is, and as much as I like it, it has this messiness and this aura of somewhat unpredictable to it. And it's your job to find the right words to explain and manage expectations in the context, right? So concretely, what could that mean, right? I'll give it a specific example because I think it's one of the hardest ones, right? For me, product management has a lot to do with innovation, right? And not process. I keep saying many books have been written about processes. I don't care about processes. For me, the real core of product management is how can we make this product 10x better, or ignite growth, or actually build the next product that excites people, right? Look at Apple or every luminary or Tesla, right? Every company we admire, at core, it's an innovation thing, right? So the issue with that is, because it's so unpredictable, it's hard to talk to your higher ups or to the executives and find the right language. For example, if the management or your company really wants or needs another successful product, and they come to you and say, hey, we need another successful product, it's very easy said, but it's not easy for you to respond to that, because how do you know whether the current product or next product can be successful, right? So for example, this is a moment where you need to translate a little bit your own work. And for example, something like product discovery that many folks know as a term, which is essentially, in the innovation part, like what are the parts of the product we should really invest in, what clicks with users, what other types of products would work, right? Which is the detective work of product. If you go to an exec and talk about the details of this, they will think that you have no idea what you're talking about, right? Because they don't want you to tinker around and try things, because that's how it sounds to them. Well, you're just trying things until something sticks. You see my point, right? What is discovery for you is try throwing spaghetti on the wall for an exec, right? Or it could be perceived. So what I'm saying with that is you need to reframe that. And for example, say, so listen, we're in an innovation. We're hearing you. You want innovation. We're here. We are doing innovation. But we're structuring it, and we have different phases. We see this as a 6 months process, for example, right? I'm just picking now a random cycle. And within the 6 months, we don't want to too quickly jump to conclusions and, come with something that maybe is 10% better, because we think the biggest potential is something that is 10x better, right? So we want to spend a little bit time talking to users and customers, because that is helpful to learn more about product innovation, what else you could do, and then come up with some hypotheses. But you know what? We want to share those with you. So could we meet in 6 weeks when we have some exciting direct data that we want to share with you, where we think we hear the best things, the resonance from the market and the users. This is irresistible to an executive to get sort of the direct touch with users, but you prepared for them, right? So in a way, what you're doing with those simple things is you're doing your own messy thing where you don't know fully where it's going, but you're talking about the process in a transparent way, right? And you're translating it to the executive so that it's not a promise that you will come up with innovation, but it's at least a promise to share the most promising things, right? And you will be transparent with them. And then you will, maybe present the 3 best candidates. Then you will have a pros cons discussion in a meeting, in a review meeting. Then you will ask for resources. So you're basically making this somewhat messy and somewhat, an expert process a little bit more transparent for an executive. I can tell you from experience, executives love that. But that's something that burden is on you and not on them. And that's an issue where I often see a disconnect happening.
Yeah, I love the sort of also delivering quick wins, to build that momentum, like getting a teaser, like getting a proof of concept going, or an MVP, and learning data, making data informed decision. I wanted to transition to another question, and also, folks, we're going to go till probably around a 45-minute mark. So for folks who can stay, please, continue to drop in the chat questions you might have for Raphael. So, actually, during our preparation over emails, you mentioned one of the superpower for you is working with people. We didn't actually quite included that in our prep, but as the community asked, I thought actually more than once, this is a good addition for us to get your take on this. As a manager of product managers, what are some of the leadership philosophies on how you approach people management in this regard?
Yeah. So this is somewhat even related to the point I was making before, which is sort of how much do you talk about abstract things that executives get, but also how much are you in the doing? And very similar here, one of the underlying things you have to decide in this question is, are you gonna just become a people manager and essentially try to be the best product management people manager, or are you still a product manager within a bigger scope or extended team? And as often, or maybe always, I think the answer is somewhere in between. But still, people choose different ends of the spectrum. And I know, for example, at Google, I can tell you, I think this is very acute at Google. It's a little bit of a hero syndrome with senior folks. I think Amazon, from what I know, is very similar, but I don't know 100 personally, but I think from what I read, essentially that even the most senior folks are expected to know basically every single detail, which is good and bad. The pro of that is that you have folks that are, that oversee everything. They understand the ins and outs. They can make the connections, and they basically still own a big thing, right? And at Google, I mean, I've witnessed that people there that can run an amount of complexity that, is just absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, the intellectual caliber of some of the senior folks there is absolutely amazing. The downside is, a couple of downsides. The one is it eats into your life, because this is stuff, I mean, this needs a lot of reading. This needs a lot of, digesting and, every day looking into things. It's a very active management thing. which can be overwhelming. That's one downside. The other one is there's at least a risk that you somewhat disempower people if you're like essentially the final decision maker, right? And that's something that where I roughly drew the line. I said, I don't want to be the guy that always makes the final decision, because then you're telling your organization and your managers that whatever they do, you will look at it and question it or challenge it anyways, right? So I rather had I drew the line differently and said, you know what? I expect them to actually be better than me because they're the experts. They're closer to the product. I reserve my right to ask questions and maybe sometimes even challenge, but they know that it's a dance that I'm doing, and I might do it more or less, but it's never meant to challenge you personally. It's always just meant in the interest of the product. But generally speaking, I would like you, person ABC, to own the product, own the mission, own the decisions, and then do the best product you can do. And should be better than I can come up with. Why wouldn't it be better than what I can imagine in a random meeting, right? So that was always my philosophy. And the good thing about that is it scales more easily, right? So you get good people and they enjoy it and they have their micro, thing and that they own and have full response. So I always a little bit more like that. It also made my job a little bit easier because, again, I had my America job as well, my US job, my stakeholder job. And again, that's sort of colliding even with reading in the evenings or things like that. But again, I think this is a personal thing everybody needs to decide. But I would say be a good people manager and be the right product manager still, the appropriate product manager for their missions, but don't overdo it either. If by the way, if there's a crisis, if shit hits the fan, and I had many of those as well in my career, then you need to be all in, right? So if you don't have instincts anymore, if you're just a paper tiger, if you're just a bureaucrat, and you're just managing boxes in a spreadsheet, then you're done. So you need to have your PM skills like always attuned and always fresh. But again, it doesn't imply micromanagement either.
Mm-hmm. I love the balance, the dance, like you said, a tango between being very hands-on and understand the details, but then also leaving the actual product manager who's like managing the product to make a lot of that decision. One of the practices we like to do at LinkedIn actually is during product reviews, we would clarify, or the exec would clarify, this is an opinion or a mandate, right?
I love that.
Sometimes you can ask questions to challenge the thinking. Doesn't mean you have to just drop everything and trying to figure out what to do with that. Yes, I think your earlier comments about how to communicate with execs using data and insights, building that case, test and learn, that innovation aspect of communicating with stakeholders really resonated with the community. And then, a big part of product management, as much as we love to just focus on the product, is managing the people, both in terms of stakeholder and then also, up, across and down, right? If you are a people manager. Now, let's transition to and again, love the tango analogy. And in many parts, product is making sure the right dance move are being played at the right time.
Can I maybe say one more thing? Because the tango just reminds me of something. There's a saying sometimes that as a PM, you're the CEO of the product. And I think this is exactly the risk with that metaphor, is that you think you run the whole show, and it's your responsibility and nobody else should interfere. And I think that's the danger with that metaphor, that you're forgetting the context and you're neglecting the communication in the context. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that addition. Now let's switch. We'll focus the final sort of part of our talk. I know that as I introduced, one of your superpower is having a knock for detecting, the promising technologies that's emerging. So from Linux back in 1995 to Bitcoin in 2014, PM being a career in the early, the late 2008, and then angel investing since 2012. So more than a decade now. You have invested in over 200 startups, including 20 plus unicorns. So maybe besides some investment strategies, joking, but how do you know if a tech is a hype or like something real, especially case in point, like the recent surge in generative AI, like ChatGPT makes such a sensational conversation for dinner table for last Christmas, right? Because the boo 5 days to 100 million, active users since November. How do you know what's real, what's not?
Yeah. Well, that's a very, very interesting question, because it goes to the heart, I think, of every good judgment in the tech space. I love this 2x2 matrix some VCs or investors use, and it's essentially being right and being controversial. So you cannot make money normally if everybody knows it already. So if it's uncontroversial, if it's sort of common sense, it's very hard to make money. So you have to be somewhat controversial or early. It's sort of the same thing. But then you also need to be right. If it's controversial, but you're an idiot and you're making bad decisions, and it's very easy to make bad decisions or bad judgment, then you're just, losing whatever money or bets or whatever you're betting on. And it's the same in a job, right? If your ideas are the same, right? Is it a good idea or a bad idea, right? So I don't have a secret recipe, but just a couple of random thoughts. I mean, the one is, I think reading a lot helps. So but I've always been a huge reader, like, and to some extent, I want to understand things at depth. I also love connecting, like Bitcoin. Like, just take a random thing. It's not as hyped up these days, but I love the intersection of economics and computer science. It's something that is, if you understand Bitcoin a little bit, it's absolutely mind blowing, and it blew my mind literally when I understood it for the first time. I'd read it before, but I didn't understand it. So I love the connecting areas, right? And I think it's actually a bit of a secret weapon for PMs if they are good in technology, but then also 2-3 other things. And then suddenly you start combining things, and suddenly you're very unique. So that's an advice I would give. Technology being somewhat, understanding technology, not giving up. With technology, you can always at some point, right? I understand enough, right? But pushing yourself a little bit deeper. The other thing I would say is you will never be 100% right? I mean, the point is never to be 100% right. And I think my meta advice I would give is, funny, it goes back to portfolio, is always have a portfolio of ideas that you're following. And with some ideas, and even if you're a manager, right? I mean, you want to have a few things that go well. You want to have a few things that you try, that you can surprise maybe your manager or make a difference. And you have a few things that you have to keep doing, but they don't generate much value for the business anymore, right? So at any point in time, I always try to have some sort of a balanced portfolio where you don't bet the whole farm on just one idea. I think that's a big mistake, because then you're dead, right? As an investor or even manager, right? You're not delivering consistently for the company. So in a way, delivering for a company and delivering or investing in ideas or companies is a very similar thing, right? And again, I would say strive for a balanced portfolio. Try to have a really one level deeper understanding that normal people, right? And then maybe the final thing I'm saying, and because you mentioned AI or generative AI, every one of those things go through a hype cycle. And if you already know that everything you will listen in the daily newspaper or in TechCrunch or anything, that is sort of now the thing, that this whole has already climbed sort of a slope that you have not been part of. And the moment you hear about it, it's probably at the upper part of the first slope of a hype cycle. And then it will peak, and then it will deflate. And that's a human phenomenon. It has not even much to do with technology per se. There is just an intrinsic thing about, feedback loops and, people hyping up things and being naive and hopeful. And then there's sort of this disillusionment, I think, is the next phase, right? If you already mentally map things on that, then you avoid maybe over-investing in the early stage, right? And I think AI is, again, at a point now where I would say it's very easy to overinvest. But then there's also another phase where it starts to actually make an impact, and maybe it's not as hot anymore. And then it might be worth a second look, right? Or serious investment. I think many executives, by the way, look at the company exactly on the whole portfolio, exactly that way, right? Where do I invest? And then they often double down on mature things, and not only in in the early things, because on the early stage, you can also like waste money, right? You might over allocate. So just be aware of the hype cycle and mapping an idea on that hype cycle, and then on the, is it controversial and or good? That maybe is a little bit of a toolkit here.
Yeah, I love that. I love that mental model of like something has to be controversial for money to still be the arbitrage opportunity, right? Otherwise,
exactly.
It's black and white. It's like, money's already been made. And then, yes, obviously you need to make the right bets in order to realize the economic potential. I know we're coming up on time. So usually for every PN learning series guest, we have a lightning round of questions. Are you ready for the challenge?
Absolutely.
All right. So drum roll. Please answer in 60 seconds or less. What would you say is your favorite product currently?
The latest one is Apple TV. I resisted an Apple TV, and I don't know why for the longest time. I bought one just 2 weeks ago, and I'm discovering how much fun it is to have a computer in your living room and a cool remote and a Siri, and the AirPods connection is fantastic. And I didn't expect that. So very well done product.
That's awesome. Who would you say is sort of the most influential product role model or leader or manager, coach in your career?
So, I love Marty Kagan. I think he's on the theoretical side, and I don't mean this in a bad way. I mean it in a way that he's one of those folks that help mature a thing. So I would blindly recommend all his books, keeping a bit in mind that he practiced, I think, 20 years ago. On a very, very personal level, that's not very useful for the audience, but you asked me personally. One of the things that deeply inspired me were the Google Earth founders that joined Google. John Hanke, who founded Niantic, and then Brian McLendon, who then became a big person at Uber and other companies. These are just relentless tech luminaries for me that, I just learned so much. And I was in awe, like whenever I was in a room with them, and still to this day, I felt extremely privileged to work with those people because they really believed in things. Like look at Google Maps today, and they started it in their head. And this was like, wow.
Yeah, I love Google Map. It's probably one of my favorite products too, when it comes to like navigating the city, finding what to eat, travel and stuff. So what would you say is one final piece of advice or resources from the community? I know some folks are asking for book recommendations since you said you read a lot. You can share that here, but also if there's more, I know you probably read a lot. Folks, if you subscribe to our newsletter, you can find a link in the details tab. We'll include, a list from Raphael that we will curate for folks to read.
I can add a few resources there. Just a couple of random thoughts now. Like I said already, I think don't neglect the exec and the context stuff. I think I try to make this clear already. I think that's a superpower, to just have empathy with the other side of the table. And maybe just one career advice that I think give everyone: follow great people in great companies. And it almost sounds trivial, but with that advice, you're also not doing other things. For example, optimizing for location or salary. So I think one of the best things you can do if you're early in your career is try to find a high growth company, and then within that high growth company, a good manager that will take care of you and that you can learn from. And then I think many other things you could almost drop, because optimizing a job profile is very complex. Again, location and salary and title and how many reports. I would say a lot of that can be the wrong compass, because I think every fast growing company will give massive opportunities to talent. And if you're willing to give 100% or even a bit more, they will give you those opportunities. And these might be gold for everything else. And then good managers really make a huge difference, in caring, in giving you honest feedback and radical candor feedback, and also unpleasant feedback. And, and then they will also fight for you, right? So it's not easy to find them, but it's much easier to know that these are the things I'm optimizing for than, again, the 10 other things like title or salary or other things. So go for the opportunity and the good people, I would say.
I love that advice. I think as part of maybe the share out in the newsletter, I know folks early in the call already asking about, is there a way that you democratize part of your coaching and advice sharing in form of some form of writing or some other curated list of resources? We'll make sure we summarize some of that in our newsletter, and obviously the practical takeaways from today's conversation as well. And thank you so much, Raphael, for your time and for inspiring such a global community of product managers, aspiring product managers, people looking to reinvent their career. So really honored to have you here today. And thank you so much for spending time with us and this community.
Thanks very much, everyone. I love this. This was great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Looking forward to seeing you next Friday in the future PM Learning Series, and make sure you're subscribed to us to receive, full of gems of recaps from today, resources, and future updates. See you, everyone. Have a great weekend.